There is a car in The Wolf of Wall Street that does something very few movie cars have ever managed to do. It doesn't chase anything. It doesn't explode. It doesn't get a hero shot with a sunset behind it and an orchestra swelling on the soundtrack. It just sits in a driveway while a man in a bathrobe crawls toward it on quaaludes, and it becomes the most memorable vehicle in a 3-hour film packed with excess. That car was a 1979 Lamborghini Countach, and after the camera stopped rolling, it disappeared into the kind of private ownership that makes automotive historians genuinely uncomfortable. Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle. And before anyone in the comments says anything, yes, I know. A Lamborghini is not American muscle. I am fully aware. But the story of what happened to this car after filming is exactly the kind of deep dive this channel exists for. So, we're making an exception, and we're not apologizing for it. Hit that subscribe button, and let's go find this car. Why this car? Why this film?
Now, I've been trying to settle this thing for years, and they've essentially stonewalled me at every step.
Some context, because The Wolf of Wall Street does not exist in a vacuum, and neither does the Countach. Martin Scorsese spent 5 years trying to get this film made. The source material was Jordan Belfort's memoir, A Man Who Ran Stratton Oakmont, a brokerage firm on Long Island that operated less like a financial institution and more like a criminal enterprise with a dress code. Belfort and his associates defrauded investors out of approximately $200 million through pump and dump stock schemes throughout the late 1980s and 1990s. He eventually cooperated with the FBI, served 22 months in federal prison, and wrote a book about all of it that somehow made the whole thing sound like the best time anyone ever had. Scorsese saw something in that material that went beyond a crime story. He saw an autopsy of a particular American fantasy. The idea that wealth was not just a goal, but a personality. That excess wasn't a symptom of something broken, it was the point. And to tell that story correctly, every single detail of Jordan Belfort's world needed to be right. The suits, the yacht, the houses, the parties, and above everything else, the cars. Because here's the thing about Jordan Belfort. He wasn't a car guy in the way that Paul Walker was a car guy, or Steve McQueen was a car guy. Belfort was a status guy. Cars were not machines to him. They were announcements. They were the physical manifestation of a number in a bank account. They said, look at what I have, look at what I did, look at what you'll never touch. And in 1987, in the driveway of a Long Island mansion, there was exactly one car that said all of those things loudly enough to be heard from the street, the Countach. There was no other option. Scorsese didn't have to think very hard. The production designer didn't have to argue the case. The Countach was the aspirational object of an entire generation of men who taped posters to their bedroom walls in the 1980s and stared at them every night before they went to sleep. It was the car on the poster, literally. The Countach poster was one of the best-selling automotive posters in history. If you were a certain age in a certain decade, that car lived above your bed. And Jordan Belfort was exactly that age in exactly that decade. And he made enough money to go get one. So, Scorsese got one too. And what he got was not a prop. It was the real thing. The Countach itself, what you were actually looking at. The car in The Wolf of Wall Street is a 1979 Lamborghini Countach LP400S. And if you don't know what that designation means, allow me to explain, because the details matter. The Countach entered production in 1974 as the LP400, and it was already one of the most visually extreme automobiles ever built. Designed by Marcello Gandini at Bertone, the car's proportions were so aggressively wedge-shaped, so deliberately confrontational, that the name itself reportedly came from a Piedmontese Italian exclamation. The rough translation is something between wow and a word, you might say. When you see something so outrageously beautiful, it briefly disconnects your brain from your mouth. Factory workers at the Bertone studio used it when they first uncovered the prototype. The name stuck. That's the kind of car we're talking about. The LP400S, introduced in 1978 for the 1979 model year, was a significant evolution. Wider bodywork, flared arches, a massive rear wing that Ferruccio Lamborghini himself reportedly hated and refused to allow on his personal car. He thought it was unnecessary. He was wrong, and he was also no longer running the company by then, which helps explain how it got approved. Under that swooping rear deck sat a 4-liter, naturally aspirated, longitudinally mid-mounted V12 engine producing approximately 355 horsepower. Numbers that, on paper in 1979, were not the most dramatic thing in the world. But the Countach was not about numbers on paper. It was about the sensory experience of the thing. The seating position was so low, you were essentially lying down. The visibility was essentially theoretical. The gear linkage was so long and mechanical, it felt like stirring a pot of concrete. The clutch required serious commitment. You didn't casually drive a Countach. You negotiated with it. You made your peace with it. And if it respected you, it would do approximately 180 miles per hour and terrify everyone within visual range. Only around 105 LP 400S models were ever produced. This was not a car you found at a dealership on a slow Tuesday. You got on a list. You waited. You paid an extraordinary sum of money. In 1979, the sticker price was somewhere in the range of $52,000 in American currency, which, adjusted for inflation to 2023, is approximately $220,000. Jordan Belfort, Peak Stratton Oakmont era, bought one in white. Scorsese found a white one for the film. Whether it was the same car is a question we are going to spend some time on. Getting the car on screen. Here is where the production story gets genuinely interesting, because filming a Countach is not like filming a modern performance car. A modern performance car is, relatively speaking, cooperative. It starts reliably. The visibility is adequate. The electronics manage the drama on your behalf. A 1979 Countach is none of those things. The production sourced the vehicle through specialist channels, as film productions typically do when they need period-correct exotic cars that actually function. This was not a case where Lamborghini's press fleet made a call to Paramount and offered a loan vehicle. Lamborghini was not manufacturing the LP 400S in 2012. The car sourced for The Wolf of Wall Street was a genuine vintage example, acquired specifically for the production, and it required significant preparation before it was ready to appear on camera. The scene in question, the one everyone remembers, is the lemon quaalude sequence. Belfort has consumed a quantity of methaqualone that has, by his own description, hit differently than expected. He crawls across the driveway of his house. He folds himself into the driver's seat of the Countach, and he drives home from a payphone across town in a fugue state, destroying 2 other vehicles in the process and somehow surviving. The actual driving sequence, the part where Belfort's Countach is moving, was handled with a stunt driver and careful camera placement. Leonardo DiCaprio was not behind the wheel for the moving shots. He was, however, physically inside the car for the close-up interior work, and getting Leonardo DiCaprio in and out of a Countach repeatedly without damaging the actor or the car required a level of logistical creativity that the production crew described diplomatically as challenging. Here's the thing about getting into a Countach that nobody tells you. The door opens upward, scissor style, which looks magnificent and cinematic and totally correct for a film about excess. What nobody tells you is that the sill you have to swing your leg over to get inside is approximately knee height, and the cockpit you're dropping into is approximately the volume of a generous carry-on bag. DiCaprio is not a small man. The Countach was not designed with comfort as a priority. Those takes required patience from everyone involved. The production also paid very close attention to the car's appearance and detail. White exterior, tan interior, period-correct wheels. No anachronistic modifications that would pull a sharp-eyed viewer out of the 1980s setting. The car you see on screen is dressed to represent Belfort's actual Countach as accurately as the production could manage. And for a Scorsese film, that level of authenticity is not a courtesy. It's a requirement, one detail that most viewers miss entirely. The car's license plate in the film is a New York plate from the correct era, physically accurate to what a Long Island millionaire would have had on his car in the late 1980s. That's the kind of detail that lives in a frame of film for 3 seconds, and that Scorsese's production team spent real time getting right. The ownership trail before the film. To understand where the Countach ended up, You need to understand where it came from. And the provenance chain on exotic Italian cars from this era is rarely straightforward. The 1979 LP 400S used in The Wolf of Wall Street had a history before Scorsese's cameras ever pointed at it. These cars changed hands frequently throughout the 1980s and 90s, often without the kind of meticulous documentation that today's collector market demands. A Countach in the 1980s was a used car, in the most practical sense of that term. It was bought, driven, occasionally crashed, usually repaired, and sold onward to the next man who had decided that this was the object that would complete him. The specific example used in production was sourced through the kind of specialist network that connects Hollywood productions with period-correct vehicles. The car had passed through private ownership in the United States, which is not unusual. The American market was a significant destination for Countachs in the period. Wealthy buyers on the East Coast and in California purchased them in reasonable numbers, kept them for varying lengths of time, and moved them along as their circumstances or tastes changed. What is documented is this: the car that appeared on screen was a genuine, numbers-matching, period-correct 1979 LP 400S in white, verified by its Lamborghini chassis number and inspected by people who knew what they were looking at. It was not a replica. It was not a kit car. It was not a tribute build with a Pontiac Fiero underneath and a lot of ambition. It was the real thing. And because it was the real thing, the moment filming wrapped, it became exactly the kind of asset that attracts serious attention from serious collectors. What happened after filming wrapped? This is where the story gets complicated, and I want to be straight with you about what is confirmed and what is still murky, because this channel doesn't speculate and call it reporting. We tell you what we know, and we tell you when we don't know something. That distinction matters. What is confirmed is that the Countach used in The Wolf of Wall Street entered the auction market following the completion of production. The car was offered with documented production credentials, meaning the seller could demonstrate, with paperwork, that this specific chassis had been used in the Scorsese film. That documentation is what separates a movie car at auction from a regular collector car. It's the difference between a significant premium and a standard market transaction. The car was acquired by a private collector. The sale was not conducted through one of the major public auction houses, which is why there is no Barrett-Jackson lot card, no Bonham's catalog entry, no publicly available hammer price to anchor the story. It moved through private channels, which is not unusual for a car of this profile and this value. Collectors at this level frequently prefer transactions that don't generate headlines. The price goes undisclosed, the buyer's name goes undisclosed, the car goes into a private collection somewhere, and the trail goes quiet. And I want to pause here for a second, because this is the part that should genuinely frustrate anyone who cares about automotive history. A 1979 Lamborghini Countach LP 400S with documented screen use in one of the most acclaimed American films of the 21st century, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, from a scene that has been watched, discussed, and referenced continuously since the film's release in 2013, went into private hands with no public record of where it went. Not because something went wrong, because that's just how it works at this level of the market. The car exists. It is almost certainly in excellent condition because at current market values, a well-documented Countach LP 400S commands between $600,000 and $1.2 million depending on condition, provenance, and the mood of the room at the time of sale. A car worth that much gets looked after. It gets climate-controlled storage. It gets careful maintenance. It does not get used as a daily driver. Nobody is crawling across the driveway toward this thing on a Tuesday morning to go get coffee. But where exactly it is, whose garage it's in, and whether it has changed hands again since its post-production sale, that information is not publicly available, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The myth, the confusion, and the market. Let's talk about something that comes up every single time this car is discussed online, and that is the question of how many Countachs were actually used in the film, and whether any of the cars people have claimed to identify as the Wolf of Wall Street Countach are the real thing. The answer to the first question is that the production used more than one vehicle for different purposes, which is standard practice and which has generated significant confusion in the years since the film's release. The hero car, the one used for close-up work, and the interior scenes with DiCaprio, was the genuine 1979 LP400S. For certain wider shots and sequences that required camera angles or movements that the hero car couldn't safely accommodate, the production used additional vehicles dressed to match. This is not deception. This is filmmaking. Every major production does it. The confusion this creates is that several people over the years have come forward with Countachs they claim are the Wolf of Wall Street car, and some of those claims are not well founded. A white Countach LP 400S that has been detailed and photographed in a flattering light is a persuasive object. It looks right, it feels right. And if the person selling it is motivated to connect it to the film, the story can sound convincing even when the documentation doesn't hold up. There's also a broader replica culture around this specific car that is worth acknowledging. The Countach has always inspired tribute builds, some of them extraordinarily faithful. A determined builder with access to the right components and a genuine chassis from the late 1970s can produce something that, visually, is essentially indistinguishable from the hero car to anyone who isn't physically examining the VIN plate and cross-referencing the chassis number against Lamborghini's factory records. The collector market for Countachs is knowledgeable enough to catch most of these, but the enthusiast market is not always the same thing as the collector market. What I can tell you is this: the genuine article, the documented production vehicle with verifiable chain of custody from the Paramount lot to its current owner, exists. It is a single car. It has a specific chassis number that is known to the people who need to know it. And any Countach claiming to be the Wolf of Wall Street car that cannot produce that documentation is not the Wolf of Wall Street car. Full stop. No ambiguity. The market for false provenance in movie cars is real, and it is an insult to the legitimate history of these vehicles, and I will stand on that all day. Where it is now. Here is what we know as of 2026. The hero Countach from the Wolf of Wall Street is in private hands. It has not appeared at a major public auction in the years since its post-production sale. It has not been placed on permanent display at a museum. It has not resurfaced with new documentation that would update the public record. There have been credible reports within the collector community that the car remained on the East Coast following its acquisition, which would make a certain geographic sense given the film's New York setting and the concentration of serious exotic car collectors in that region. But those reports are community intelligence, not confirmed fact, and I am not going to dress them up as something more solid than they are. What I will say is this: a Lamborghini Countach LP400S at current market values is an asset that generates attention whenever it moves. It gets appraised. It gets insured for a significant sum. It gets serviced by specialists who know exactly what it is and what it's worth. Cars at this level don't disappear the way a fleet Ford pickup disappears. They leave paper trails in the places that matter, even when those paper trails are not visible to the public. The Wolf of Wall Street Countach is out there. It is almost certainly in better condition today than it was when the production returned it to its owner after filming. And someday, when the current custodian decides the time is right, it will come to market. When it does, it will generate significant attention, significant documentation, and a price that will make everyone who had the opportunity to buy it quietly in 2013 feel a very particular kind of regret. That is the nature of these cars. They wait. 4 things are true about the 1979 Lamborghini Countach from the Wolf of Wall Street, and I want to leave you with all 4 of them. First, it is a genuine numbers-matching LP400S, one of approximately 105 ever built, and one of the most visually significant Countachs in existence because of its documented screen history. Second, it is in private hands, and the full ownership trail is not public, which is frustrating, entirely standard for this segment of the market, and not the same thing as the car being lost. Third, any Countach claiming to be this car without documented chassis verification is not this car, and you should be skeptical the moment someone tells you otherwise. And fourth, the scene it appeared in, one of the great pieces of physical comedy in Scorsese's entire filmography. A man on Quaaludes negotiating with a car that has the ergonomics of a fever dream is one of the reasons this car matters beyond the metal and the history and the provenance documentation. That scene is funny and dark and perfectly observed, and the car is central to every single beat of it. The Countach wasn't decoration, it was the punchline. It was the indictment. It was the whole argument Scorsese was making about what Jordan Belfort's world actually was, expressed in one white Italian wedge sitting in a Long Island driveway. That's what a great movie car does. It does the director's job without a single line of dialogue. If this one hit different, drop a comment below and tell me which car you want us to track down next. And if you haven't subscribed to American Muscle yet, now is the time. We go where the cars go. We find out what happened. And we tell you the truth about what we find, even when the truth is that nobody knows where the car is and we're all just gonna have to live with that. I'm Johnny, this is American Muscle. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.